Without further ado and objection, we'll go ahead and get started. Hi, this is FEDC. Happy Tuesday morning. It's Tuesday, December 1st, 2020, 8:02 in the a.m. Good morning. We're here for our latest Energy for All Alaska Task Force meeting. Our guest today is Mr. Nolan Klouda. For those of you who don't know them, I have to remember from time to time that not everybody knows everybody we know or work with so closely. So good old Nolan Klouda is the executive director of the University of Alaska Center for Economic Development, which is part of the UAA Business Enterprise Institute. And I think it's, well, you'll correct me, Nolan, if I'm wrong, but it's really a pretty broad interdisciplinary shop supporting, actually, when you fold in SBDC, some of the investment groups, again, for support of small businesses, business, entrepreneurial development, and the economy in Alaska. It's pretty diverse and active shop. Mr. Nolan has been the executive director since 2014. Prior to that, he served as the associate director. He is a certified economic developer through the International Economic Development Council, I believe one of only 2 or 3 in the state. As a board member of the University Economic Development Association and serves on the Municipality of Anchorage Budget Advisory Commission. He holds a Master's of Public Administration from the University of Kansas and a Bachelor of Arts History and Political Science from Gustavus Adolphus College. All right, so without further ado, I'll hand it over to Mr. Nolan. Just a little word. Again, the primary focus of today's presentation discussion is relative to the Alaska Defense Industry Resiliency Initiative. Part of this is something that Mr. Dotson had advocated for quite strongly for several years, which is to performance of a supply chain mapping study for the state of Alaska that would allow us to in the future better align the needs of the military with our own production so we could satisfy those needs in state as much as possible, maximizing the benefit of that industry within our state. But it's a much broader initiative. So I did ask Nolan if he might kind of go over that as well, that broader initiative, but also give an extra word regarding the Center for Economic Development that, again, does a lot of really great work here in the state of Alaska and for we Alaskans. So again, without further ado, Mr. Klouda, please.
All right, excellent. Thanks for the introduction, Jomo. Yeah, I'm Nolan Klouda. I direct the Center for Economic Development. That's part of the University of Alaska or the Business Enterprise Institute. The programs at BEI that probably you'd recognize the most, in addition to our center, the Small Business Development Center and the Procurement Technical Assistance Center, are all housed under our umbrella. We are all statewide in our orientation and our programming. And but what I want to talk about here today, some of you have been to a few presentations I've given on this topic, but we are leading this Alaska Defense Industry Resiliency Initiative that is an effort that's funded by Department of Defense, actually by the Office of Economic Adjustment. OEA also funded the Eielson Growth Plan with the borough. And this program by OEA is designed to kind of take a step back at the state level, look at what's going on with the military as an economic driver in your state, and try to see just strategies for how to strengthen, especially the firms and the commercial sector that depends on the military, because the military sees it both ways, that Department of Defense depends upon that commercial sector to meet its needs, as well as that local area, needing the economic driver of the military. And so it's about how to build these supports stronger. And so, our goal is this is a first phase that's really collecting, baseline information and initial approaches for how to organize this. But these are the types of things that are goals of our initiative, to better understand the vulnerabilities, barriers to firms that are in the defense space, and how communities are sensitive to changes in defense spending. And I think no community knows that better than the borough does when it comes to the way that a potential BRAC and the implications that could have, like years ago, but also when you have the increase in defense spending, which is a good problem to have, right? Then you do have to make the adjustments to it, right? Like as with the F-5s. So our effort is all about laying a groundwork for a statewide kind of strategy around these types of topics. And so these are some of the major deliverables that we've got. Our sort of grand opus that'll be coming out is the data on the supply chain that's looking at what's supplied in state versus out of state, where the spend is located down to like very specific levels of detail. But we did already complete a vendor survey of defense vendors. And an economic asset map, and we have more work coming out. But what I'm going to talk about a bit today are some of the economic impacts of defense in Alaska, and an understanding of some of the best practices, the ways that you can better organize economic development efforts around the military. So start off with, I think that a really basic point about the military in Alaska is that we tend not to always think about it at the state level as an industry, as a major driver. I think that Alaskans generally, understand that the military is important. We have obviously a high number of veterans in state. Military is a big part of our history. I'm a fifth generation Alaskan, but I've had one of my great grandfather who came to Alaska as a result of defense expansion, in the right after World War II, and so I think that a lot of us have a reason, have a tie to the military in our families as well. But as an industry, we don't really talk about it that much. We did you've probably seen these kinds of reports, especially done by the McDowell Group. How many jobs does oil and gas create in Alaska? What about the seafood industry? How many jobs are created by that? The mining industry, all of these industry groups have, somebody who advocates for them, an industry group who advocates for them, and does some bragging on behalf of that industry about the importance that it is to the state economy. And that's every industry has that obligation in some ways to talk about why it matters and why it's important as a driver. But we tend not to have this for defense, right? I couldn't find an example of anyone tabulating the overall economic impacts of defense in Alaska at the state level for more than a decade, actually. So what are those impacts? So here are the numbers that we did from doing our analysis that defense spending, and we do include the Coast Guard in this too, by the way, because even though it falls outside of DoD, part of our scope is the Coast Guard, which is obviously very important to many of the coastal smaller communities in the state. But 58,000 total jobs these are including these indirect and induced jobs, as well as the direct ones on the installations and with contractors. But 33,000 civilian jobs, and because most of the employment statistics that are kept, like by the Department of Labor, Bureau of Labor Statistics, they tend to count civilian employment as the overall, that's the employment number, and that's what unemployment numbers are based on and all of that. So if you look at just the civilian jobs created by defense, it's that 33,000, or about 1 in 10 jobs in the state that are tied to the military. And for comparison, if that's 58,000, this is how those other sectors stack up. Oil and gas is, this just about 78,000. It's more if you add in some of the state jobs tied to oil and gas because of the revenue. That's how you get a number that's around 100,000. But mining there, seafood is around the same as defense actually, but the payroll for defense is about twice the size. Seafood has a lot of non-resident employment and a lot of seasonal employment. The jobs tied to defense are higher paying, and more of them are year round, although you obviously have seasonal construction jobs and so on that are in the mix. So in reality, the only industry that really exceeds defense as a job creator is oil and gas. So how those 58,000 jobs I mentioned, how are those broken down? What are the categories within that? And so this is the breakdown there. You start off on the left there, you've got the direct payroll by DoD and Coast Guard. That's the uniformed active duty folks. That is also the civilian support folks that are employed by the federal government. That is the National Guard and the reservists. But the active duty are the bulk of that. There are over 20,000 of that total, about 5,000 or so civilians, and then the rest being the reservists and members of the National Guard. So around 30,000 jobs there. The contractors, the first tier of spending that happens with contracting activity, by our estimate is around this number, around 10,000 jobs. It's primarily, we're talking about the prime contractors. There isn't always a neat way to separate out your primes from your first tier subs and second tier subs and so on. But that's about the number right there. Mostly prime contractor jobs, 10,000. And then the second and third tier of spending, as those businesses spend money, buy supplies from other vendors, and also as households spend money on all the things households buy, groceries, haircuts, although not in my case, and health insurance, rent, whatever. That's that additional 18,000 jobs. So add that all up. That's how you get the 58,000 statewide level. Now, how's it spent regionally? And this is where it gets very interesting, I think, are some of the regional impacts. This is just the spending that happens on contracting, right? So it breaks down about like this. Over the last 3 years, you've got Anchorage. I mean, I did this by economic region, but it's not, there's not that much spending in the Matsu. It's really about half of the spending the last 3 years on average was in Anchorage. About 36% was in the interior. And then the remainder of the state is just, about 13%. A lot of that's places like the Coast Guard base in Kodiak and Ketchikan and Sitka, and miscellaneous spending that happens, like remediation sites that are defense funded, Southwest Alaska, some of the work like that. But when you look at, but I think the way to look at this, Anchorage and Fairbanks and the interior combined is pushing 90% of the total spend, right?
Excuse me, Nolan, we did have a quick question in the chat box. So it's actually back a little bit, not the dollars, but the bodies. Isn't our portion of military employees versus total state population higher than many other states?
I believe that I believe that we are, as far as the proportion of active duty to our civilian population, I believe Alaska is the highest. I'm going to double check on that. I do have some of the other stats about our total amount of spending per capita. It's about fourth highest in the country. But when we look at personnel compared to state population, I believe we are probably the highest. But yeah, I could double check on that though.
Okay, thank you.
For those of you that like to take a little bit of the historical perspective, what does defense spending over time look like? And this is adjusted for inflation, right? So going back to the, we had in the some years of very high spending, in the 80s. I mean, going back into the, to the 50s, it was of course even higher on a per capita basis. But back in the 80s, still Cold War era, generally higher levels of spending. And we had this drawdown, in the 90s with the post-Cold War defense reductions that happened. And then a ramp up again in the 2000s, especially post 9/11 type of era, right? When spending went up. And we're in this era now, now in the 2010s where, we've had these kinds of ups and downs, a little bit of drawdown after the global war on terror. And where we are now, we've had this trend upward. A lot of that is probably going to flatten out. This is some of the project completions, the long range discrimination radar, and of course the expansions related to the F-35s. Of course, we'd love to see some more expansions happen, like with the KC-46s and anything else. But that's the sort of broadly what the spend looks like. Now back to what the military buys in Alaska. These are the categories averaging the 3 most recent complete fiscal years, or up through 2019, I guess. We still don't have FY 2020 data complete, even though it ended in September. But those top 3 categories there, you've got your construction, waste management and remediation, professional scientific, professional services. Those account for 4 out of every $5 spent. Those are the things that the military buys. Now, of course, construction is probably not a surprise. That second category is a big catch-all. It includes a lot of facilities support services that happen on base, everything from the janitorial to the security to everything that's required to keep an installation running. Also includes the large environmental remediation projects that occur in state. We've obviously got a lot of those sites that have been cleaned up and that are being cleaned up, and probably many more that need to be, going back many decades. And then of course, professional services, your engineers, architects, consultants, accountants, all of those types of folks. One that surprises people, why is manufacturing is number 4 on the list, right? Like what is that? That's mostly refined fuel. Counts under a manufacturing classification for our purposes. Below that, you can see everything gets fairly small. But I know that this group is focused a lot on energy, and so worth pointing out that the manufacturing is being refined fuel, the utilities spend, the oil and gas one that you see a little bit lower down there, that a huge amount of spending, by the military, depending on how you classify it, is in fact energy, right? Keeping those installations heated and supplied, and all the transportation fuels required as well. You're talking about a pretty big energy spend, and I think folks in this room, in this virtual room, are probably pretty acutely aware of that. So looking at the economic impacts around the state, I think that this is maybe surprising, maybe not to folks in the room here, but in the interior region, obviously this is, we've got, the whole interior region, but the Yukon-Koyukuk census area doesn't have much military spending, but between the Fairbanks North Star borough, the Denali borough, and then Southeast Fairbanks census area, that gives you the 4 bases essentially. In addition to the 2 in the borough, you've got Fort Greely and you've got Clear. They account for, we're talking 23,000 total jobs and 13,500 civilian jobs. This whole area, the total number of civilian jobs in the whole area is just around 40,000, just a little above 40,000. So if just that 13,500, civilian jobs that contribute to that, that's a third of the employment in the region. I think that for any industry to contribute that much, it shows you what an anchor defense is in the interior region of the state. I thought it was important to, we could also, of course, look at just Fairbanks North Star borough and the effects there. I did think it was important to look at Clear and Fort Greely as well, because I know that Fairbanks is obviously an important commercial hub for those other bases.
So a very large impact on the regional basis.
Oh yes, absolutely, hugely important.
Nolan,
Mr. Dotson, I see you are off mute.
Yeah, Nolan, in 2012, when we did the economic analysis, we used the figure of 30% of all jobs. The total number of jobs in the interior at the time was, as I remember right, 57,000. And what we did is we, unlike the state, we included the military as a job. So that came up to 30% of the 57,000 jobs were total military jobs, including civilian employees, obviously. But interestingly enough, this figure you're using today is 31% of all the civilian jobs, not including the military.
Right.
So this probably reflects the growth because of the F-35 and the buildup a little bit at Fort Wainwright and the LRDR and other things.
I think that's exactly right. And yeah, there's obviously that we used FY 2018 numbers for this because we had the most complete set of information, and that is just about the peak year, I think, of spend on F-35 related related facilities and so on. So that is a big part of it. We did also, I think it's in I put it into the report that we did, but I didn't put it in this presentation, but we also did like you did, and the total jobs, military and civilian. And in the interior, it was almost so high that I was like, people are going to think this is an odd number, but it was around 40%, I believe, of the total military and civilian jobs. So in some ways, if you look at it that way, this 31% is in some ways kind of a conservative number, even. In Anchorage, Mat-Su, it's about 1 in 10 jobs. About 30,000 total jobs, 17,000 civilian jobs. You can look at it this way: that the interior with a smaller population combined has almost the same number of jobs that they are as Anchorage, right? As Anchorage, Mat-Su. 13,500 civilian versus 17,000, which is pretty impressive. In Anchorage, this where I live, where I'm joining you from now. The military is not very as well recognized, and I think that it's a smaller piece of Anchorage's economic picture, but historically every bit as important as it is in the interior. I think that the fact that Anchorage is where it is owes a lot to the military. And so I think that is something that's pretty important. There is not tremendous awareness of that in Anchorage. The rest of the state, it makes sense to we had to just sort of lump every other part of the state outside of the interior and Anchorage, Matsu, into one kind of region like this. And even there, the total number of jobs, 48,000 or 4,800 total jobs, 2.5% of civilian employment. That obscures the fact that, like, in places like Kodiak, Ketchikan, and so on, the Coast Guard bases are hugely important. Kodiak's a smaller town, but the Coast Guard base in Kodiak is about the same thing that Eielson or Wainwright is to Fairbanks. So when I talk to the Southeast audiences or to coastal audiences, I always need to point that out. So those are the main overview of the impacts. What I think I'm still all right on time, right, Jomo? You'll give me the old boot if I'm going
Actually,
over.
you're zipping right along. Why don't we take just one moment
Yeah.
and let everyone catch up? Are there any questions that anyone has? I'm surprised.
All right.
I will say one of the great things about this industry, again, it's a stable industry with good paying jobs. So they really are kind of cornerstone. It's a cornerstone industry.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an anchor industry, I think, and with other a lot of the resource development industries, and I think that they've obviously done tremendous good for the state, but they have their cycles, right? They have their periods of high production and ramp down, and they and I think that the military is something that it's going to have its ups and downs as it has over the years, but I do believe that the military will probably always be in perpetuity an important component of Alaska's economy, as it has been, well before statehood.
Well, now you're getting to your recommendations about how we can make sure that happens.
Sure. Yeah. So, these recommendations that we've got, this isn't all of the recommendations from all of our work, but we've been working with, there's a consultancy tip strategies, TIP strategies that they won through an RFP process. They won the bid. They've done a lot. They're an economic development consultancy. They're based out of state, but they have done a lot of work on military related projects like ours, and they had worked in Alaska as well. There's always that process of teaching an out-of-state consultant about Alaska, but these guys are bright. And they did some investigation in including interviewing folks like Jim and others that know economic development and that know the military in Alaska, and a bunch of other research as well. I'm won't go into all the details. And what we had asked them to look at is what are some models for how to do a statewide defense alliance? How do you actually organize the civilian efforts around enhancement of your existing installations or expansion of existing installations? You look at some of the opportunities in the state, I know that the interior community has done a really good job with advocating for, the F-35s and for the KC-46s and for, for other kinds of expansions like that. But at a statewide level, how do we put our best foot forward to make the military want to stay here, want to enhance the missions that are here, and want to put us at the top of the list for future considerations, right?
Perhaps in the same way as, say, the Alliance or the RDC relative to resource development.
Exactly. That's exactly the way to look at it. And so obviously we have a Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. DMVA's function though is not an economic development function per se, right? It performs pretty necessary functions, but not necessarily in the economic development front. And so TIP helped us formulate what it might look like to have more of an organized effort, with advocating for economic development and defense in that same space. And so they came up with some preliminary suggestions. And what I really am putting this out there in a preliminary way, but I'm also really interested in what kinds of, I know we've got good folks on this on this call that have opinions about this type of thing, and that probably have some good perspectives to offer. But they suggested kind of two approaches that might potentially overlap, and one is to establish through state legislation a statewide military coalition alliance that has an appointed board of directors and probably an executive director type of function. Doesn't necessarily turn over with changes in administration, but it serves that advocacy role and that convening role when it comes to economic development and defense. And the other related piece is an Office of Military Affairs within state government. Something different from DMVA, something that would be much more focused on the business front. And I can expand on these a little bit.
My feel of DMVA has always been they lean a bit more towards the VA, the Veterans Services, as opposed to, again, military advocacy or Overwatch.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably fair. And those are roles that need to be done, but they are pretty different from economic development, I think. So if you look at like our State Department of Commerce over the years, it's pretty slimmed down now, but over the years, they've had a timber specialist and commercial fisheries specialists and mining specialists on staff, but have they had defense? No, they haven't. And defense is bigger. Timbers, there's not to speak ill of any industry. Timber only has 200 timber jobs in the whole state, right?
Yeah. One of the things keep in mind is that the National Guard has a mission both to the federal government and a mission to the state, and it is a specific mission that is not necessarily based around economic development.
Right.
So it's not their job. It's not their thinking process. They do a great job with what they're supposed to be doing. One of the things, Nolan, when you get a chance, would you kind of tell this group a little bit of your experience in investigating other states that have a military alliance that support their military industry?
Sure. Yes, I can speak to that, and actually, this is a good point to do that. So the idea of a military coalition alliance would be, members are appointed by this in statute, appointed by the governor, probably representing military communities and other sort of constituencies, and that's going to meet regularly, discuss, act on key issues impacting the military and defense sector. I think you can almost think about this maybe an odd analogy, but maybe like something like the Board of Fish in some ways, right? Like it's a state appointed body, and in statute meets regularly. And these are the kinds of things that it would do, identified here, advocating for, for military installations, missions, the defense sector, the public infrastructure that might be needed to support retention and expansion of military installations. What's the infrastructure need there? What are some of the state policies that might support military installations? I think that Jim and his group and others on this call did a really good job of shining a light on the spousal occupational licensing reciprocity issues, things like that. Whose job is it, to really focus on those things state level, and then also this bottom one here about the quality of life for uniformed service members and veterans and their families is becoming, I think we're seeing that come into focus as a really critical issue. The world of economic development, even outside of the military, is focusing a lot on quality of life, like about the livability of a place and its attractiveness for people to stay. And that's no different for the military. A lot of service members are younger folks, that are increasingly like interested in the quality of life amenities, recreational trails, fun entertainment options, stuff like that. And so, it expands out from there. So that's the Coalition Military Alliance. There are some really good examples of states that do this. One that came to our attention, a lot of General Chandler, Howie Chandler. He helped to bring to our attention that there's a Kansas Military Alliance that he knows pretty well, and it's in some ways kind of a model for this. There is also a Washington Military Alliance. the TIP folks, the consultant on this project, they helped to organize that Washington Military Alliance. And, the group is sort of, think of this, it is that it kind of fulfills the role of like an RDC for defense and for military issues, and I think that there's a lot of important issues to discuss there. Jim's talked a lot about the some of the boards that have been formed over the years under DMVA, like AMFAST, ACAST, and they can get ignored at times. They can get sort of neglected at times. They can also a new administration comes, changes priorities, changes membership. The Coalition Alliance sort of avoids a lot of that type of thing. Still politically responsive, of course, but not immediately going to completely do a 180 every 4 years, 8 years, whatever the case.
Nolan?
Yeah.
Two things, if I may. One, actually, none of those were actually under DMVA. They were directly to the governor.
Oh, right.
Those AMFAST, the Council of Wise People.
Right.
But yeah, you
although
sure
my understanding was that they were always like convened by DMVA or whatever. But yeah, I know they are governor appointed folks.
Okay. I do think it's important that second to the last bullet, maximize economic benefits to local communities. Because as many of the, well, in case anyone on the call doesn't know, so much of the discussion is about how do you balance these interests? Because it's, again, there are things that we want to do, again, to keep our community and our state attractive to the military, but it's not a hard over, we'll do anything for this industry, sacrificing the quality of life of Alaskans themselves. So it is about that balance between interests and benefits.
Yes, absolutely. It's got to be, any kind of an effort like this, it's got to be responsive to the needs and wishes of communities, right? Of host communities. And that is pretty critical. And I see the question from Clark about interfacing with members of the general public too. And I have to believe, I have to believe it would need to function that way. Absolutely. Opportunities for public to give testimony at meetings, things like that, I think would need to be part of it. It needs to be responsive to the public, to the general public. Yeah.
Sorry, Nolan. Mr. Hajdukovic, I see that you're off mute. I just wasn't sure if you had a question. Oh, now he's on mute. Okay, please carry on, Nolan.
So yeah, so that's the idea of that coalition alliance. The related office could be Alaska Office of Military Affairs, and this is imagined, in our current environment as being something that's either under DCCD, the Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development, or under the Office of the Governor. It could be structured in either place, but the idea of it not being under DMVA is because it is much more of an economic development function, right? You have some type of full-time executive director there, somebody whose job it is to wake up every morning and think about the military and the economy. That's pretty important. We are in this situation where it's kind of diffuse, right? It's not any one person's job to think about military economic development, on a sustained basis. And then that person, it kind of manages the various efforts, coordinates the meetings of the Alliance and Commission, that other body, and then some of those key functions are listed here. But supporting the retention and expansion of military bases, defense-related businesses to expand in or relocate to Alaska. Obviously, we're not trying to introduce competitors to our in-state firms. But when there are companies, like when you have a Lockheed Martin or other defense vendors that might be able to establish an expansion or a presence in Alaska, what are we doing to encourage that, right? And then also thinking about the liaison functions with the federal delegation. Pretty important there. The delegation holds a lot of the strings, and they need to be told, they need to have a light shined on what they should be focusing on and what they should be worrying about. Educating Alaskans and public officials on the military's economic impact. It's interesting to me how in some ways kind of neglected that space has been. Before our work on this space, we found that just it's amazing how much hadn't been done to talk about the military's impact in our state. And then of course being a clearinghouse for military information. So those that's a starting point. Those 5 bullet points that's enough to keep a person or a small staff pretty busy in perpetuity, I think.
As a matter of precedent, I remember when I was in then Senator, now he's Lieutenant Governor, Kevin Meyer. We actually worked with the administration, private industry, and the stakeholders about moving. It was actually moving the Alcohol Control Board or control of alcohol from public safety over to Department of Commerce. Mm-hmm. And really it was about, there was a feeling that perhaps the economic and financial aspects of that industry were being given short shrift under a purely or an overarching public safety model, not being as fully recognized as they should. So there's some precedent for this kind of creation and the kind of alignment that you're talking about.
That's right. I think it's exactly that type of a body, right? It's it's a commercial serving focus in a lot of ways, and does need to have that type of an orientation to it. And being associated with state government gives it a certain amount of clout. Being able to access, and have a tie to the top level decision makers in the state, the governor, the legislature is also really critical. But this is this group of folks, I think this is something I think we can use feedback on how to pursue this. How, is it the right vision? Is there something about it that should be modified? We're talking about 2 components here. Ideally you have both, I think, but if you have to pick one, which should it be? These are all things to think about. Is something like this necessary, important? I put it out to you guys.
Certainly here in the community, we feel like it has. Certainly successive administrations have felt so. I believe what our Tiger team, the military Tiger team from the mayor's office, was commenced under Hopkins, and every mayor since has kept it in operation.
Sure. Yeah, the Tiger team is in some ways kind of a template for this, right? It's what the Tiger team is, for the borough. This group could be for the state, right?
Mr. Terrio, I see that you've taken yourself off mute. Would you like to ask a question?
Yes, thanks. I'm just wondering, for those states that have an entity of this nature, what is the funding mechanism for the group?
The cases that I'm aware of, one is that, and I do actually have all this information about showing what the annual budget is for several states that have this as an example. A lot of them, it's in the ballpark of, for the Office of Military Affairs, it is typically like a couple $100,000 a year. Some as little as like 120, 150, basically like 1 FTE. That's about the spend. As far as where that money comes from, it's mostly coming out of general funds. I don't think that there's usually like a special funding mechanism to support it. Really, it's you're talking about general funds, which I know are very scarce right now. But I would argue that there's a pretty high return to the economy from doing it.
Okay, so it looked like your last slide. We were actually at your last slide. The next one is the thank you.
It was the thank you slide, yeah. So any thoughts, questions, comments? Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Well, Nolan, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you had actually done other presentations on this where you did a deeper dive into some of those case studies. And I don't know if it was something that was accessible that you would just pull up in case we were slow on questions. But I see that Mr. Soley has taken himself off mute. Mr. Soley, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Nolan. Rick Soley. Sorry, I don't have my video on at the moment, but thanks for the presentation, and very interested in this discussion of an entity that advocates for the military and just quality of life, those kinds of issues. I'm reminded of the conference that FEDC kind of brought to Fairbanks. Was it a year and a half ago now? The acronym JOMO was
the Alaska Defense. Is that what it was?
Well, it was the Alaska Defense Group, but it was a consortium of communities that advocate for defense.
It was
And I
the,
guess,
yes, it was the Association of Defense Communities Alaska Defense Forum. Oh, and credit where credit is due. Brittany Hutchison, or excuse me, Brittany Smart in the mayor's office did the heavy lift. We supported.
okay. So I guess what I'm wondering about is kind of, you mentioned the RDC, Resource Development Council model, which is totally a private model, privately funded, privately directed. And this suggestion that, or this example kind of is something that would be housed in the state government. Are there some other examples nationally of privately funded entities where you have a community-based or Alaska-based advocacy group like RDC that's privately funded? That I might have missed that, but I guess I was curious.
That's a really good question. And originally I was interested in thinking along those lines too, because, just recognizing like how hard it can be to get funding from state government right now. I mean, it's just not, asking for money right now is just a good way to get laughed out of the room, right? But most of the time, in an overwhelming majority of cases, there is a strong state spending footprint. I think that there may be some private contribution, some private organization around it, but it does seem like in nearly all of the examples that we looked at, the real catalyst is state government. And I think that there are probably some pretty good reasons for that. One is that so much of what you're doing is like a government to government type of relationship, right? State governments, when you approach your congressional delegation on behalf of a state, or when you approach, federal agencies on behalf of a state, there's a certain level of clout to that exceeds what you might have from a coalition of only private entities. And so there are some uniquenesses about this space where that state government role seems to add a lot of kind of oomph to it, a lot more sort of clout and importance to it. That's not to say that it couldn't be done entirely private, because that could end up being the only way to go if you can't get traction in state government. But that does seem to be the case from the examples that we've looked at.
Thank you. That's very interesting. And I guess I'll ponder on this, the idea that if we were even better, is we'd have this state entity that you speak of that could be appropriately advocating. But even beyond that, there could be something that would be a private entity in addition. So we would be really differentially aware, obvious by the fact that we've had both a private entity and a state entity. Anyway, that's just my strategic planning thought for the day. Thanks.
Sure, those are really good thoughts too. And I think that if it's entirely government without private support behind it, I think that's also pretty weak, right? It's got I think it's strongest if it has both. And I think it would really behoove this entity, if created, to have the private industry really on board, and to have the private industry be a partner to it. It can't be all state driven and led without that, right? I think that'd be a big missing piece.
Mr. Dotson, of course, you're off mute, and then I see that Mr. Hall is off mute as well. You're my boss, Jim, so you get to go first.
I was just going to weigh in on the concept of private versus public group, and I think Nolan and Rick talked a little bit about it. One of the things that happened in the past is that Mayor Hopkins and I went down to visit the people at Luke Air Force Base and the community, of course, because they are the largest primary F-35 training base in the country, and wanted to know how they got by. Arizona, of course, has a statewide group that supports the military, like Nolan's talking about. The communities that surround Luke Air Force Base, and there's a multitude of them. I think 5 different municipalities were part of a different organization that also supported specifically Luke Air Force Base, and it was called Luke Forward. That was a membership of those municipalities, plus it was a membership of many private individuals that worked, and it was more of how do we support the base? How do we make sure that the base, the people are that live on the base are taking care of their quality of life? Of course, is important. This gets into issues like reciprocity and things like that. But but nevertheless, I think that two organizations like that can work very well together. And of course, I always told people, I've told this to Nolan many times, he's tired of listening to me, so that's why I'm not talking too much, but that, for years and years and years, Alaska was taken care of by Senator Ted Stevens. And of course, we have, tremendous support from our current congressional delegation in the military. But if Alaska really wants to have the military as a key component to the state's economy, that it needs to start participating. And we just, we've kind of stumbled through the process. We talked about AmFAST and we talked about ACAS, but we just haven't got there. We haven't developed a system that sustained that is not connected with an administration, is connected with the state of Alaska. And if you think of 10% of Alaska's economy is military, and we basically sit and twiddle our thumbs and don't pay any attention to it, it's a little bit crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Jim's been a huge influence, on this work, and somebody I constantly calling up Jim to ask questions and bounce ideas around too. And so FEDC I'd have to credit as being doing some really fantastic work in the defense space and trying to create more of a statewide vision for it. But I think that there's a good point there about the groups like AmFAST and ACAS. That they can get ignored, they can get wiped clean and start from scratch pretty easily. And I think that we probably need an approach that has clout, that has continuity to it. And I think that's really where things need to go if we're really taking this sector seriously.
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Jomo. And actually, it surprises me that this something like this isn't in existence, considering the military and the impact on Alaska. And we've been fortunate with the delegation in Washington and work of Fedco and Jomo and Jim that have contributed an immense amount. But I guess what I was wondering is, in the locations where there are similar agencies or coalitions, generally speaking, is the conduit to the information coming from the military, or is it going from the region to the military? It seems like it's difficult sometimes to influence on a federal level, and maybe you alluded to that with a level of clout, but how does it work in other locations? Is it the military coming to the coalition, generally speaking, or does a coalition, reach on out to the military and say, we're going to put in bike trails or whatever? How does it generally work?
I think that it's got to be, you've got to have a solid two-way communication channel, right? I think you really have to have both. I think we know that when the structure exists for something like this, then I think that the base commanders, I think that they will see it as a part of their duties to engage with it. I think that usually they're really good about their community liaison types of roles. Their community contact and relations are things that these are things that the military generally does very well. But it does have to be both, right? And obviously the military's got some lines that they have to be mission focused. They're not, their job isn't economic development in Alaska, and that's always something you have to respect. But within their limitations, they need these kinds of communication pathways as well as the civilian world needs them into the military, I think.
What I have found out over the course of the last couple of years, and it was a bit of a revelation, I hadn't realized to the extent that the military relies on the civilian sector and has been relying on the civilian sector more and more. Even though their funding keeps going up, and it seems that way, the way their funding comes down, they actually, these military bases really are relying on the communities that host them to pick up more and more of the slack, particularly on things that are necessary for their service members, but are sourced outside of the fence line. Education is an excellent example. And again, I just hadn't realized to the degree that shift had occurred. I just remember when I was a kid, as a military brat, when Dad was stationed out in Fort Campbell. It was a huge base there on the border of Tennessee and Kentucky, and there were families that never had to leave the base. You didn't have to leave the base to have a full life at there in Clarksville, or there at Fort Campbell, as opposed to here at Fort Wainwright, where yes, you probably could get by just living on base. Certainly you can survive that way, but you're not going to have the full life experience just within the fence line. And so having these kinds of organizations to help communities glean what the military and their service members need, but also helping the military understand what the community's needs are to satisfy those requirements are more and more important as we go.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. Yeah, and a lot of the logic behind defense, funding efforts like ours is that recognition that they know that local economies, state economies are often very closely tied to the military, but they also know that the military needs a really strong and stable commercial sector to supply its needs, right? And so that is a really important thing. I think that even the way that the military, a lot of people don't realize, helped advocate for statehood for Alaska in the 50s, and part of it was needing a strong civilian space around these strategic assets. In the Cold War, Alaska's, location close to Russia, close to the pole, but it doesn't do for Alaska to be very lightly populated, sparse place with some military installations. They wanted to see a whole civilian space around it that supported families and that provided the commercial needs, right? And so it does go both ways.
Well, we have say 6 or 7 minutes left. I see a number of representatives, Rep. LeBon, Rep. Hopkins, Rep. Prox. I would like to offer you gentlemen an opportunity if you do have any questions or comments, as well as everyone. Okay. I see Rep. Hopkins. No, go ahead, Greg.
No, I was just no specific questions. Just going to say thanks for the great presentation and a lot of food for thought. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Hopkins.
So, Nolan, so what is the status of the broader initiative, the broader research and analysis initiative? I know that we here at FEDC, of course, have gotten a couple of presentations on preliminary results. Just want to see how that's going and when that kind of information can be more fully available to folks like Rep. Hopkins, again, the representatives, the senators, our congressional delegation, and of course, ourselves and the civilian, the rest of the sector.
Sure. Yeah, there's 3 more components that are coming down the line. One is in addition to the stuff that we've already completed, but one is that the overall report that encapsulates the best practices. I pulled the military alliance pieces from that. That will be done by the end of the year, the end of the calendar year. So that's just, which is just a couple of weeks away. And that'll include all of the best practices recommendations, information about how other states do it, that puts it into like our Alaska context. There will be also some information too, and this is also relevant to this group, I think, about university ties to defense and how those can work. That's something that's coming. We haven't talked as much about that in our public work yet, but that's coming down the line. The way that defense funding for research and partnerships with universities around R&D and so on. There will be our big data opus piece on this is the supply chain piece, and that's the one that breaks down, in a lot of detail what the military buys in Alaska, where it buys it, when it buys it, what's supplied by in-state firms, out-of-state firms, and some of the opportunities that FEDC is talking about with how can we get more Alaska companies into the supply chain to meet needs that are maybe met by out-of-state firms. So that's a piece that is coming soon as well. And then we have a little bit more work on the economic impacts too. We have one economic impact piece is done, and I can share that. That's the one that shows the jobs. We also have Musin Gatabi from ICER, from Institute for Social and Economic Research, has done some work on looking at the sensitivities of communities to increases and decreases in defense spending over time. So where we can try to see like how, when spending increased around, say, the F-35 bed down, what were some of the near-term impacts from that? And so there's some more rich detail in that information. So there's more stuff coming. We are also looking at a second phase of our work in partnership with OEA that would be more focused on strategy formation, sort of statewide strategic planning around what we can do with defense. And that is something that we're just starting to think about what that looks like. So yeah, there's lots more to do. We've always got new stuff coming out on this project. But yeah, Jomo's pulled up the web link there. Anybody who's interested in that, I'd encourage you to take a look. We've got a lot of work on that page. Our reports that we've already completed, and presentations we've given, and a couple of fact sheets, a lot of good information there. So that's what we update frequently as well.
Excellent. And just again, for the viewing audience, you'll see I just went and pulled up, I Googled CED Alaska Defense. It took me right to it. Again, you can see the web address there in the upper left corner, and a lot of good information. And again, a lot of great work ongoing.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jomo. And I'll put it in the chat as well. I will send out my presentation to you as well, Jomo, and also I do have a fuller presentation that has like examples from the different states, including some information like how much their budget is and what their main activities are, a bunch of stuff like that. I'll include that as well, because it does have some really good detail about other states and their defense alliances.
Is that posted on the website? Could you find it using the link you just shared?
That presentation I don't think is actually, so I will send it to you. And actually I probably should make sure I put it on there too, but I will send that, because I think if you guys want to look at some of the specifics, that's got some good information in it.
I believe folks will. So again, in the meantime, again, if you'll send it to me, if anyone would like it, you all have my email address. I'll just send it out to you directly. All right, well, we're in the last minute and 30 seconds. Are there any further questions? Going once, twice, thrice. All right. Again, Executive Director Klouda, thank you so much. Excellent presentation, great information, and really necessary focus and body of work. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim and Jomo. It's always fun working with FEDC. You guys are doing great stuff and helping to do a lot of good at the state level as well.
No, that ain't true by a damn sight. Oh, always fun working with FEDC. All right, but thank you again, very generous. All right, well, everybody, thank you so much. As stated in the chat box, happy belated Thanksgiving. Hopefully everybody had a happy, healthy, safe, and fun one with their families. Just as a word on next week's presentation, we will have a presentation next week. It's actually a presentation that we received at the FEDC board at our last meeting. It was with Mr. John Bittner. He's the director of the Small Business Development Center here in Alaska, SBDC, as well as a Mr. Jonathan King. He's a private consultant. Mr. King has been doing a lot of research and analysis relative to COVID and the impact it is having on our healthcare sector. And he has some very important information. I thought that you, particularly you policymakers, should get to see before you go down to Juneau and before the rush hits, so you can begin thinking about it. And then, of course, Mr. Bittner, relative to the economic impacts on the broader economy of the COVID pandemic and how it's gone so far. So again, that will be our presentation next week. So without further ado, if there's nothing else, hey, everybody, again, thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great day, and we will see you next week.